Good morning and welcome to Southminster Presbyterian Church. I'm Don Ludwig, the interim pastor, and this is, by my count, our 8th Sunday for virtual worship services. We're glad that you could join us. If you're watching this early, then know that at 11 a.m. this morning on Sunday, April 26th, you are invited to join the congregation in a fellowship hour that should have a lot of fun and a good time of connecting with one another. So you can visit our website for the Zoom link and hope to see you there at 11 o'clock. Donald Trump goes on a fact-finding visit to Israel. While on a tour of Jerusalem, he suffers a heart attack and dies. The undertaker tells the American diplomats who are accompanying him, you can have him shipped home for $50,000 or you can bury him here in the Holy Land and it'll only cost you $100. Well, the Americans go into a corner to discuss their options. When they return, they say to the undertaker, we want Trump sent home. The undertaker is very puzzled by this and asks, well, why would you spend $50,000 to ship him home when he could have a wonderful place to be buried here in Israel and only spend $100? Well, the American diplomats reply, well, we thought about this, and long ago there was a man who died here, a man who was buried, and in 3 days he rose again, and we just can't take that risk. It is good to laugh even in times like this. I am so thankful for people like Pam Gross who sent that joke to me, and my family and I have laughed quite a bit. It helps us to keep sane and a level of brevity even in the serious times that we face. Sober reality. A mess. That is the world that we live in today. We live in fear and the lurking knowledge that things will never be the same. We want to return to pre-pandemic days, not realizing that the fault lines of oppression that are becoming ever so visible in this pandemic have existed in this country throughout our existence. Most of the articles that have flooded our newspapers and our news feeds have forced us to confront the reality that our cities have thousands and thousands of poor citizens who have no place to go when there is a moment of crisis that comes their way, and nowhere to go if they did. And we also see that rural areas are largely left to fend for themselves. In preparing for this sermon, I was somehow prompted to glance through a book from seminary days. It had one of C.S. Lewis's sermons when he was in England in 1939. It was entitled Learning in Wartime. Lewis writes, I think it is important to try to see the present calamity in perspective. The war creates no absolutely new situation. It simply aggravates the permanent human situation so that we can no longer ignore it. Human life has always been lived on the edge of a precipice. War, just as this current pandemic that we are experiencing, aggravates the permanent human situation. Lewis goes on to say, We are mistaken when we compare war with normal life. Life has never been normal. Even those periods which we think most tranquil turn out on close experience and inspection to be full of cries, full of alarms, full of emergencies. Life has never been normal. The virus is just shining a light on the truths many of us have been able to choose not to see. Helen D. Gale writes, "The more you look into our health and health inequalities, you realize that a lot of it is not due to a particular disease. It's really linked to underlying societal issues such as poverty and inequity, such as lack of housing and lack of access to safe drinking water." Consider some realities of the inequity of disaster. African Americans are 3 times as likely to die because of deeply historical inequalities in healthcare, income, and housing. We can get more specific and look at Wisconsin, for example. African Americans represent 6% of the population, but nearly 40% of COVID-19 fatalities. Hourly workers have become essential workers for us thanks to this virus, but they encounter hundreds of people a day with all the risks that entails. While some of us complain about having too many Zoom meetings or being in isolation. Even more, there's a laundry list of risk factors that put people of color and low-income families at a greater risk for the virus. After what happened in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Winston Marsalis asked, "What other than injustice could be the reason that displaced citizens of New Orleans cannot be accommodated by the richest nation in the world?" We have asked that same question many times in our history, and certainly we can ask that question today. What other than injustice could be the reason that so many Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities have experienced higher rates of infection and even death as a result of COVID-19? What other than injustice? In our gospel today, a familiar text to us at Southminster, Jesus walks into the temple and confronts the Pharisees and teachers of law and challenges the systems of injustice on every corner. Quoting from Isaiah, Jesus decries, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Life has never been normal. Sometimes it takes a flood or a hurricane or a pandemic or the coming of a man named Jesus for us to realize that. To realize that the inequities of this world have been created by us and perpetuated by us, by our own apathy and indifference, by our own self-serving contentment, allowing us the privilege of doing nothing. A significant part of the justice work of this congregation, not only in these virus times, but throughout our 72-year history, has been about maintaining awareness of the cries of suffering that so many of us could easily choose not to hear. Our current world has gotten quieter. There are fewer people in streets, fewer planes overhead. The normal buzz has given way to being quiet. Perhaps this is what we need. This quietness is what we need to hear the voices of those who suffer, to hear those voices who yearn for relief of the oppression that they experience. Not only now because of this particular pandemic, but as a matter of course in their way of existing in the world. These days, I found much solace and value in listening to my president. He has provided me with much wisdom. He is so down to earth. He uses reason as his guide and views faith as integral to our emotional strength. I've come to admire him greatly. By the way, my president these days is Andrew Cuomo. I'm not sure who else you were thinking of. Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York. I listened to Cuomo this past week talk about the need to come back better, the need for transformation. He admonished us, when you go through a time like this, you pause, you reflect, you learn, but then you grow. Then you move forward. We cannot simply be waiting out the time. Life has to become different for us. We have to change. Andrew Cuomo has received a lot of heat by the Christian right for insisting that God is not making things better in New York. People are making it better. Cuomo later said the number of deaths in New York is down because we brought the number down. God did not do that. Faith did not do that. Destiny did not do that. A lot of pain and suffering did that. That's how it works. It's math. And if we don't continue to do that, Cuomo says, we are going to see the number of deaths go back up. And that would be a real tragedy if we allow that to happen. President Reagan used to like to tell the story of a farmer who poured out years of sweat and effort into what was once a rocky, unfertile territory. He invited the pastor of his church out to see his progress one afternoon. "Oh my," the Reverend said. "Look over the rows and rows of vegetables and fruit trees. This is great. The Lord has really blessed you." Well, the farmer grinned and grimaced as he responded, "Well, I wish you could have seen this land when the Lord was doing the work all by himself." That's a humorous story, to be sure. But the Christian right wing has had a heyday over Cuomo's words. How could he not give God the credit for New York's apparent success? It is because for Cuomo and for that farmer, nothing would change if we don't do the work to make it change. God is not to be blamed for the bad things happening, and God is neither to be praised for our success. Our faith in God is grounded in reality and effort. Friends, think about this. There would be no need for Jesus to come to this earth and challenge the Pharisees in the temple about their unjust practices if God could have changed things on God's own self without us. What would the need be for us then? We are the hands of God. We are living in a time of uncertainty, and though I would love to give concrete answers as to when life will return back to normal, I remind all of us who are thinking that to know this. Wanting to get back to normal is a sign of your privilege, of my privilege. For some, for many, life has never been normal. Rather than returning to our old ways of doing things, my hope is that the new world we create, in that world, we will more clearly see the inequities of disaster for what they really are. That for far too many people, life has never been normal. As Christians, we were made for this. Whatever it takes, we are willing to do. Whatever is needed in service of others, especially those who are most vulnerable. We were made to challenge the systems of oppression. This pandemic is only opening our eyes to a world that has always been. So I would hope that we Christians would always remember that God alone won't change things. Faith alone won't change things. Only we can change the inequities of disaster. This is a world, this is a social world that we have created, and only we, yes, in faith and by God's mercy, only we shall overcome. Will you pray with me? A prayer for a pandemic, written by Cameron Bellum. Loving and gracious God, may we, who are merely inconvenienced, remember those whose lives are at stake. May we who have no risk factors remember those most vulnerable. May we who have the luxury of working from home remember those who must choose between preserving their health or making their rent. May we who have the flexibility to care for our children when the schools close remember those who have no options. May we who canceled our trips. Remember those who have no safe place to go. May we who are losing our margin money in the tumult of the economic market remember those who have no margin at all. May we who settle in for quarantine at home remember those who have no home. As fear grips our country, let us choose love. During this time when we cannot physically be together, wrap our arms around one another. Let us find ways to be the loving embrace of God to our neighbors and to each other. And may all of us have the courage in knowing that we together shall overcome. Amen.